Greetings everyone, my name is Dr. Jason Freeman. I'd like to welcome you all to my channel. In this video, I review the book Blood Done Sign My Name by Timothy B. Tyson. I tell you what I like about the book, I tell you what I don't really like about the book, then tell you why I think you should read the book or just skip it. Now at any point, feel free to click the notification bell or subscribe to my channel to get more content. So, without further ado, let's begin. Blood Done Sign My Name is about the 1970 murder of Henry Marrow, a Black Vietnam veteran who was murdered in Oxford, North Carolina. In addition to describing the murder itself, as well as the trial that followed the murder and the aftermath of the whole situation, the book also goes into depth about the history of Oxford, North Carolina in general, specifically in regards to Jim Crow and kind of the racial history there. This book really hit home to me because I'm from Eastern North Carolina. I grew up in Greenville, North Carolina, Winterville, North Carolina, Ada, North Carolina, just Pitt County in general. And that's actually where the murderer, Robert Till, as well as the great-great-grandfather, the author, they're both from Pitt County. So what did I like about the book? Well, first and foremost, I really like the fact that Tim Tyson, a white Southerner from Eastern North Carolina, was really brutally honest about white racism in the South. Now, Tyson begins the book with a quote from a friend of his where, in part of my language, the kid says that his father and his uncle went ahead and killed them a nigger. Tyson writes in great detail about white supremacy that he saw from friends and family that was, pretty ubiquitous in his community, including, the use of the N-word by himself when teasing a young boy who was the son of a woman that worked in his home. He talks about the paternalism of white liberals and how, he himself internalized the kind of inherent white supremacy in his community. And when I talk about paternalism, I think about something like The Blind Side, the movie The Blind Side, where essentially the idea is that African Americans are weak and unintelligent and can't really take care of themselves and must be saved by some, nice white person who, out of the kindness of their heart has decided to try to help them in this particular situation. And the main thing I like about Tyson's kind of description of kind of the white community in Eastern North Carolina and in the South in general is that he doesn't try to sugarcoat it. He doesn't try to justify the actions of individuals. It's not a situation where someone's trying to reclaim the narrative and try to make their particular community look better than they look historically. He is very blunt about this is what happened. This is why this man Henry Marrow was able to be murdered in broad daylight with basically no consequences in this community. And he links it to, again, the history of white supremacy, slavery, Jim Crow, that goes back many decades and centuries in his community. Another thing I like about this particular book is that the Black people he talks about in the book aren't just passive victims of discrimination. He goes into detail to talk about many of the people in the community of Oxford, North Carolina, Black individuals who were actively fighting against discrimination. He talks about Golden Franks, who actually I didn't know growing up, but I knew who he was. He would be around in Greenville, doing civil rights thing when I was young. And so he was active after this murder happened in 1970 and throughout the 70s during the trial. And so he talks about people like Golden Franks. He talks about various people who stood up and fought back against discrimination, even at the cost of, their lives, their livelihood, and even their freedom. He talks about Vietnam veterans who, rather than, again, being passive victims of discrimination, were actually going out and attacking the white economic infrastructure. They would burn down tobacco barns. He talked about the strategies that they used to go ahead and to attack those various parts of the white economic power base. And so I like that. I like the fact that it wasn't just this kind of sugar-coated thing that was, all about the marches and things like that. It talks about, again, the ways in which people were fighting back. He even talks about during marches how, people had guns to defend themselves. And every so often you would hear about people, again, fighting back against the racial, threats and violence that they faced. And along the lines of the criticism that he had of the kind of larger white community, in particular, kind of the paternalism and some of the racism. He also talks about how, in many ways, these efforts, these civil rights efforts, were largely done by African Americans and led by African Americans, and that many, as he was talking about in the book itself, many white liberals stood on the sideline as many of these efforts were taking place, only coming in maybe towards the end, once these either things were accomplished or when it looked like that certain efforts weren't going to succeed overall. And the last thing I would say I liked about the book was that he was not, sugarcoating what happened with Mr. Henry Marrow. He goes into the detail about the gruesome murder of this man, of this Vietnam veteran. And so, I just didn't, I like the fact that he was not afraid to kind of just talk about the brutality of this murder and also talk about kind of the response to it from the Black community versus the white community. In particular, kind of the coldness and the kind of lack of empathy that many in his own community didn't have following the murder. And so again, I think that's important that you show kind of the brutality of this thing to make it feel real for a reader. Even though this thing happened again a decade before I was born, I felt the anger and I felt I had a visceral reaction to this murder, reading as if it just happened yesterday. So what didn't I like about the book? Well, the main thing is that the book, I think, is way too long. So not including the author's note, which is only a couple pages, like two or three pages at the very back. The book is 322 pages long. That's long. And I felt like it was too long because there's a lot of extra, I'm not going to say fluff, but extra stuff in the book that didn't need to be there. So this book is both, as he mentions in author's note, both a memoir and a history book. And so the memoir part, it was just too much. He talks a lot about himself. There's one point he talks about waking up. He had a drinking binge. He woke up and he had thrown up and had he been face down. It was just kind of a crazy thing to add in this book that I felt like, I guess it said where he was as a person. I just didn't feel it was needed. And he mentioned that in the master's thesis, which is this book is based on his master's thesis. He went to Duke University. I went to UNC for grad school. No hard feelings. I like him. But the point is, he writes about kind of himself a lot in this, again, as a memoir. And I felt if you took all that out, it would get more to the core of what really happened, especially with the family of Henry Marrow, which I don't think is covered enough. I wish they had more about his wife, about his child, maybe what happened with his wife and child after the fact, rather than so much about Tim Tyson. The other thing he mentions in regards to the length is from this whole Southern storytelling tradition. Now, growing up in Eastern North Carolina, I'm familiar with it. And actually, I like it in some cases, this idea of talking these elaborate, oftentimes funny stories about, these situations that happen to tell some kind of, moral or something like that. One of my favorite films is a documentary called Sherman's March. And it's the same kind of idea. And it includes all these long, interesting stories about people in the South. And so that's in here. I just feel like if you took all of that out, you can get really more to the crux of the book, which is about, again, the history of racism in Eastern North Carolina, the efforts to fight against racism by both blacks and whites. Again, it's not just about the black struggle, though he does mention that, again, with the civil rights struggle specifically. Again, a lot of it was spearheaded by African Americans. But the point is, I think if you take out, again, the memoir part and the kind of superfluous stories that were interesting with just added link to the book, I think you get to the core of the book, and I think it would have been a tighter story, and it just didn't have to be 322 pages. So, should you read this book or just skip it? I would definitely say read this book. Now, a while ago, I did a list of 5 books I think everyone should read regarding Black history. And this could be easily number 6. The reason being is that it gives a perspective that you don't typically hear. You have a white Southerner who benefits from Jim Crow segregation. I mean, in regards to things like, competition for jobs and education and things like that. But he doesn't buy into the system. He sees the endemic problems with the system, the immorality of it. and he speaks out against it, even though, again, it's essentially a system that benefits him. And so that perspective is valuable, and I'm really glad I was able to read this. It reminds me of talks by Tim Weiss. I have a video of him on the screen. And so Tim Weiss, again, is a white Southerner who speaks out against white racism, which I think doesn't really happen enough. And so this book is kind of a book version of kind of Tim Weiss's talks. And so if you're a fan of Tim Weiss, definitely this is a book you should read. And the book also, again, pushes against the narrative that, again, Black people were just passive victims of discrimination. It talks in detail about efforts, both violently and non-violently, where Black people did fight back. I think that's very important. I think it kind of gives more context to a larger battle for equality and for justice in this country. And so while we had a Dr. King who was totally nonviolent, we had a Nelson Mandela who did take up arms against white oppression. And I think both are valuable things to have in regards to the fight for equality. And so you found that review interesting and or informative. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel. Also, please share this video. And if you have suggestions for other books related to Black history that you'd like me to review on this channel, please leave those suggestions in the comment section below. Thank you all for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day.